Hello, everyone. So today we're going to do criteria for the best explanation, or inference of the best explanation. Uh, so this this type of argument kind of form in a way is more of a way of assessing explanations that you find. So a lot of times you'll give different theories or different explanations for anything, and you'll try to say weigh which one is better than the other one, right? Which one is stronger explanation than the other. So there's a set of criteria that we use to kind of determine or help us guide us to looking at whatever, figuring out whatever explanation is best. And this style of argumentation is used for by people for a very long time, especially in the sciences, especially early in the scientific revolution. Newton made us think about it. So did Francis Bacon. These types of people. You see historiographers making a lot of doing a lot of research on it, trying to figure out the best sort of historical explanations given the data that we have. The tools are also used for like ancient text evaluation to figure out which one is oldest and those types of things. And so this and it's also sometimes used in police work as well. So the criteria are pretty handy. I'm going to kind of teach you some of the how to set up the argument and then how to evaluate it based on the criteria. And so that's kind of going to be what our discussion is going to be today. Okay, so to start this off, we had to give a story because there has to be a situation that needs explaining, right? So a lot of times there's some sort of phenomena that requires explaining. We don't know what the explanation is totally, but we know some of the data, some of the facts that occurred. So imagine a scenario. I come home from work, and when I come home, we had gone to Costco the night before, and I put all the cookies in a cookie jar, right? So imagine there's like a lot of cookies, there's 20 or something, or more, and Costco cookies. So they're all in the cookie jar. So I come home from work, and I go into the kitchen and put my hand in the cookie jar, and there's no cookies in the cookie jar, right? So I look down, and I see cookie crumbs on the counter, on the floor, down the kitchen, down the hallway, into the living room, and onto the couches in which my children are perched with cookie crumbs on their faces and watching the television. And so later, I go out with my friend Matt, and I say, Matt, you never guess what happened. I went home, I bought these Costco cookies, put my hand in there, gone, I told him the whole story. And and he's like, Paul, it's obvious what happened. And he's like, look, what happened was the kids were watching TV, and they were getting up and down, getting cookies, and they were crumbling them as they were walking back and forth eating the cookies. And I said, got the trail, right? And I said, Matt, how dare you blame my sweet children? I said, what happened was that there were these fairies, and the fairies came in the house. And the fairies came in. Fairies are mischievous, types, and they like to frame small children. And so and my children aren't small anymore, but I'm telling the story long enough that I'm just going to continue with it. But one of them is videotaping this right now. But anyway, so the fairies, they like to frame small children, and they're very mischievous and magical too. So it's not like what happens is they don't know the cookie crumbs are getting put on the kids' faces because the fairies are magical and they can get away with that kind of stuff. Right? What they did, the fairies did is they took all the cookies and they just made the mess and they smeared it in the bale because that was the fun. Okay, so now we're left with two explanations, right? We have the story. And the story is of the situation, something that requires explanation. The story has a set of facts in it. We can number these facts. These facts are what we'll call the data points, right? Data points. And the data points are going to be like the essential facts of the story. If the story doesn't have these facts, then it's a different kind of story. So fact number one would be that there were cookies, lots of cookies are missing. Two. Crumb mess. from kitchen to 2 couches on 3 crumbs on both kids' faces. Okay. And so we'll say that number 4, we'll also add in here, just have some more information, that the kids denied it. And saying Matt's explanation for the kids denying it is that kids often lie to get out of trouble, and my explanation is that they didn't do it because the fairies did it. So it makes sense. They didn't lie. So now we have, so these are our data points. There's not all that many, but that's okay. Now we have Matt's explanation, and we have my explanation. Okay, Matt's explanation has certain facts about it too that are essential instead of mine. But the essential facts of Matt's explanation and the essential facts of my explanation, they're not called data points, they're called explanatory tools. So they're explanatory tools. So Matt's explanatory tool is that kids ate cookies. To travel back and forth from couch to kitchen. Oops. Eating cookies making a mess. And 3, kids lie sometimes. Okay, so my explanation is different. My explanatory tools are that the fairies did it, that they're mischievous, that they like to frame small children, that they snuck in, that they are magical, that they, and is that all that? The fairies took cookies and made a mess. Okay. So, you notice, so here you have a set of explanatory tools over here. So on this side, these numbers are called explanatory tools. And they're numbered. Over here, these numbers are the data points. Let's call them data for now. And these are the essential facts of the situation that require explaining. So you look over here at Matt's. Matt has 3 explanatory tools. And you look over here at mine, and mine has 5. So I'm gonna go ahead and switch this board real fast. Okay. So now, what we want to start looking at this point is the criteria for best explanation. So before we were just setting up we're setting up the system so we can use it. We did that by telling the story, getting the essential data from the story, numbering them as data points, getting one explanation, another explanation, breaking those explanations into their explanatory tools, and those tools are numbered. So you should have 3 sets of numbered data sets of data. One called the data points, and the other two are called explanatory tools. Then what we do is we run that information through these criteria to see which one wins, or which one we say is explanatorily superior. The first criteria that I want to talk about is explanatory scope. Explanatory scope is that the best explanation explains or covers more data than the rival. So the best explanation then covers more data than its rival explanation. Matt's explanation, so we have over here, number 5, we have another data point, which happened at my house. Okay, so there's 5 data points over here, so that's what we need to cover. Our explanations need to make sense of each one of these data points. So we want to see which one does it in fact happen that way. The question goes, whose explanation has more scope? What you find is that it seems as if it has the same amount of scope. They seem to both explain what happened. But that's actually not the case. My explanation cannot explain why it occurred at my house. So consider this situation. Say I live on a block with 4 other houses. Each house has the same age kids, same number of kids, same amount of cookies. The fairies, right, if everything else is equal, what's the likelihood that they're going to hit my house as opposed to one of these other neighbors' houses? It's only 25%, right? So there's an equal chance we'll hit any of the houses in my neighborhood. The thing is that, why did the fairies choose my house as opposed to anyone else's house? Well, that's not explained. And because that's not explained, it can't make sense of why it occurred at my house, because there's only a 25% chance it would happen at my house. It's very low odds, given everything else that's around me. And in fact, it's probably a lot worse. I mean, if you spread that out to the general neighborhood, there's probably a lot of other houses with kids and cookies that they could have been to. So my explanation has poor scope. It covers less of the data than Matt's does. Matt's, of course, does explain data points 5, because Matt's explanation says that my kids did it. The kids live at this house. That's where they are. So it makes sense that they eat the cookies at their own house. So that's explanatory scope. You want an explanation that covers all of the data. The next one we're going to look at is simplicity. Simplicity is also, some people call it parsimony, and some people call it Occam's razor. It's a little bit, this simplicity is preferred for me, at least, in a lot of ways. But anyway, so simplicity is what we're going to look at. So here, what simplicity says is that the best explanation has the fewest So the best explanation is the one with the fewest explanatory tools. That's pretty much it. So simplicity is just a numbers game. You just count. Matt's has 3, mine has 5. Matt's is simpler, right? Pretty easy. Okay, so since Matt's has 3 and mine has 5, then Matt's beats mine in that regard. So now Matt has met the criteria, the explanatory virtue of scope and simplicity more than mine. The next one that we're going to talk about is explanatory power. So there's 2 types of explanatory power. There's explanatory power A and B. So A, we're actually going to talk about second. So B, explanatory power B, is a combination of scope and simplicity. Okay, so we want an explanation that covers all the data, and we want one that's simple. Why do we want one that's simple? So there's a lot of reasons, and simplicity, by the way, is one of the most controversial one on this list. But simplicity, one of the reasons why is because the idea is if you have more parts, it's more likely to break. So if you have an engine with, say, 1,000 parts and an engine with 10 parts, the question is which one of those is going to break more frequently or more likely to break? Well, clearly one with more parts, because there's more opportunities for something to go wrong. So if you can have a simpler argument, then there's less likelihood for error because there's just less things stipulated. Now the goal here is to have explanatory power. One explanation is to be more powerful than the other one. What does that mean? It's here's one way to think about it. So say you're in a tug of war match, right? And say on one side you have 2 guys, on the other side you have 4 people. So on this side you have 2 people, on this side you have 4 people. So you have team A and team B. Now imagine that, say there's a tie. If there's a tie, then which one of these teams is stronger? Or which one of these teams is more powerful? 1, A or B? Well, so that's kind of a tricky question, right? Let's ask it a different way. Say if team A wins. If team A wins, what does that mean? Well, it means that team A is more powerful than team B. That's clear, right? Because each one person right here is doing more work than, say, 2 people combined. Because not only did it tie, but they won. So let's go back to tying. So what if they tied? Which team is stronger? Which team is more powerful? Well, team A is more powerful. The reason why is because they can do more with less people. They can do the same amount of work in this case with 2 fewer people than team B. And so these people are more powerful even though they're doing the same amount of work. They're tying. If team A wins, then team A is doing more work and they're more powerful. So what you want is an explanation that combines simplicity too and scope. That can either tie, that can explain the same amount of data as one with more explanatory parts, or beat it and have more scope than one with more explanatory tools. So that's explanatory power B. Explanatory power A is slightly different. Explanatory power A is, you can think about it like this. The best explanation will make the data more likely. More likely to occur. So what does that mean? Because the data did occur, right? The facts happened. So how does an explanation make the data more likely to occur? Well, so here's one way to think about it. So if you have my explanation of the kids, right? Oh, I'm going to flip this, huh? So we have my explanation of the kids, and we have Matt's explanation of the kids eating the cookies, or the cookies story. So the question here is, okay, well, which explanation, if true, will make the data more likely? Would make you expect to see this? What if the fairies happen? So the way you think about this is imagine the cause behind it, the agent, the actor, the one taking and doing the cookie stealing. In Matt's, it's the kids. In mine, it's the fairies. Okay. Now, imagine the scenario. In a world in which the kids are the way Matt says they are, and a world in which fairies are the way I say fairies are, which world would you expect the cookies to go missing in my house more? So there's a world in which kids are the way Matt says they are, right? They have a hard time stopping themselves from eating cookies, they make a mess and don't see it, that kind of business. That world. And the world in which fairies are the way I say they are, mischievous creatures, magical and stuff. Which world would you expect to see my cookies go missing in my house? Well, certainly the one in which my kids took the cookies, right? Because my kids live at the house. So Matt's explanation that the kids ate the cookies has more explanatory power because you would expect to see all this data occur if Matt's explanation were true. If my explanation were true, you wouldn't necessarily expect to see all these things happen in my house. It's a little bit odd. Why did it happen there? It's not clear. So Matt has more power in that regard. The next criteria that we'll look at is plausibility. So plausibility is, the idea here is that the best explanation is consistent with accepted clues by relevant experts, or among relevant experts. So the idea here is that, so plausibility does not mean true, right? So plausibility has to do with whether or not it's consistent with what people believe. But we don't want to know what just anyone believes. We want to know about the relevant experts and whatever the heck we're talking about. So if you're talking about, say, like the, the coolest trends, you don't want to go ask, like your grandpa, right? He's not a relevant expert. If you want to know, what's popular in some sort of music industry, you're probably not going to go ask someone who spends most of their time knitting. Right? You want to find the relevant experts. If you want to know what's wrong with your car, you don't come ask a philosopher. Obviously, if we're just a philosopher. So you want to ask relevant experts. If you want to know whether or not, say, string theory is consistent with observational data, you don't ask a philosopher. You ask a physicist, right? You want to know if something's plausible, if it's consistent with what the relevant experts think in certain things, and then if it is, then we call it plausible. Now, it doesn't mean that it's true. It just means it's plausible. Okay. So here, mine is not plausible. But the reason why mine is not plausible isn't because, obviously fairies don't exist. A lot of things obviously were not true, or obviously were true, and then turned out not to be true. I'm not making an argument for fairies here, okay? What I am saying, though, it wasn't that long ago when we thought that caloric was heat, right? Or that, bleeding people saved them, or they needed to have a right kind of balance of, bodily fluids and these types of things. Or that, the sun revolved around the earth, or, the earth was flat, or that there were witches, or I can go on. So plausibility is a very weak position to go from, because what seems plausible today might not seem plausible tomorrow. So plausibility should only be one part of a solid argument. Here, fairies are not plausible. It's not the case that they're implausible because most people don't think they exist. That doesn't matter. What matters really is when you start considering the relevant experts. So who the heck would be the relevant experts on fairies, right? So what we'd want to do is ask some mythologists and see what comes along with that package of fairies, right? Fairies don't just exist in a vacuum. If fairies exist, then they come along with a whole history. So what does the fairies have? You ask the mythologists. Okay, So you get that information from the mythologist or whoever, and you're like, well, fairies clearly change the seasons, fairies help the plants grow, they paint bugs, they're responsible for all that kind of activity, right? So then you can all of a sudden find some relevant experts. So you look at, say, like a botanist about the plants. Hey, do the fairies really grab the plants from the seeds and pull them out of the ground to make them grow? Is that how plants grow? And then they'll be like, oh no, here's the process by which plants grow. And all the botanists will be like, no, that's not consistent because of these reasons, right? You also ask, say, a meteorologist about the changing of the seasons or whoever studies that. And, and they'll be like, oh, no, it doesn't seem like there's a bunch of little like agents cruising around space changing things like that, right? Rather, that's not consistent with the things we think. So fairies are not plausible. Fairies aren't plausible because the fairies' existence is inconsistent with what what the experts typically think about what fairyologists say about fairies, if there are such things as fairyologists. So plausibility is important, but it's only one bit. Is it plausible that, say, my kids ate the cookies? Yes. Why? Because it's just normal for kids to eat cookies if they're not supervised. The cookies will probably be like a lot of them gone, if not all of them gone. This is what you should expect. So clearly, Matt's is more plausible than mine. The next one we'll talk about is ad hoc. So ad hoc is something you don't want. So you don't want it to be ad hoc. So sometimes I'll call it less ad hoc. But something is ad hoc. I'm going to do less ad hoc. I think it makes more sense. So less ad hoc. Less ad hoc says when it's the best explanation will have fewer new suppositions than the rival. Okay. So new suppositions. The best explanation will have fewer new suppositions. What does that mean? A supposition is something that is added in to make sense of these things. So every explanation is going to have suppositions. It's going to be a lot ad hoc because every explanation needs to fill some sort of gap. So you have this raw data, and you have to kind of connect the raw data together with like sewing needles. But the string of those needles is are the suppositions that you're placing to kind of connect the data together. So Matt clearly has some suppositions here. Mostly it's going to be his number 2, this is their behavior. This one right here is more of an observation than a supposition, but mine is going to have some suppositions. So for example, the only reason why I have that the fairies are magical here is to make sense of the fact that the kids didn't mention that there were fairies in the house. The only reason why I say that they're mischievous is to give a motivation for them to come into the house in the first place, like to bring children, right? So magicalness or mischievousness, these two things are they don't cover any of this data. They don't cover any of the data, but rather what magical does is it kind of covers the data that they, we have another one, 6, cookie crumbs, my face. So that the fairies smear the cookie crumbs. The only reason why we have magical is to make sense of this one, right? The kids didn't mention it, but the fairies did it. So the only way they get away with it is that they are like magical creatures, right? That somehow are like so fast or whatever, the kids didn't see it. So this is incredibly ad hoc. It's a totally new supposition. I threw it in there to save myself right here, right? And so Matt's is less ad hoc. This truly is a little bit ad hoc because we don't really know what happened. It is a supposition. So every explanation will be a bit ad hoc, but you want yours to be less ad hoc than someone else's. Because the more you add in, the more new suppositions you add in, the more likely it is to kind of go wrong. All right, so that's ad hoc. Let's see. The next one I'll do is falsifiability. So falsifiability. So the best explanation will be, in principle, able to be proven false. So in principle, an explanation should be able to be proven false. It doesn't mean that the explanation is false. It doesn't mean that at all. It just means that in principle, you can marshal evidence against it. If an explanation is such that you can't, in principle, marshal evidence against it, then that explanation doesn't grab onto the world in a way that we can sort of make sense of and give evidence and objections and reasons against it. Now, both of these, both of Matt's and mine explanations are falsifiable. So, is there good evidence for fairies? No. What kind of evidence we have against fairies? Well, that evidence that contradicts the worldview of fairies. And so you can marshal evidence against it. Can you marshal evidence against Matt's? Yeah, certainly, right? What kind of evidence? Well, I don't know, you get the kid's testimony. You can do some sort of, observational things in the house or something, try to figure it out, right? So both of our explanations are falsifiable, but there are a lot of some explanations just in principle aren't. The best kind of example of this is going to be conspiracy theory. So conspiracy theories in principle aren't falsifiable. And because they aren't falsifiable, they're not really making any interesting claim about the world at all. So for example, in principle, I call it a conspiracy theory. Evidence that's launched against it is always taken as evidence for it. If an argument if an explanation or a theory can't have you can't marshal evidence against it, then that theory just is not interesting. It's not making claims about the world, because you have to be able to latch onto the world with your words to try to figure out the way the world is. But if every time you are getting evidence against your position, you accommodated it into your position, then your argument is not falsifiable. It's really kind of uninteresting. Now, so here's how that works in a conspiracy theory type of thing. So say, it's like, so you say, well, all these people, say the high levels of government are lizards or something. Right? And you say, okay, well, is that falsifiable? Maybe. So you say, how would you falsify that? What in principle could you do to demonstrate that might be false? Well, perhaps you can get a blood test. You can test for DNA. Do they have lizard DNA or do they have human DNA? So you do all these tests to the high-level officials, and all of them come back with human DNA, right? And so what you do is you give this information to the conspiracy theorist, and the conspiracy theorist says, well, that's exactly what you would expect. That's exactly what they want you to think, right? They're going to doctor the evidence. Okay, so this just proves, they'll say, that this conspiracy is true because they're doctoring this kind of evidence. Okay. They'll say you videotape them with their kids or something like that, acting all human, or you see them get cut in a public setting and there's red blood instead of, green blood or bright yellow blood or whatever. And so, you say, well, see, look. You say, oh, that was a stunt. They did that on purpose to show, to convince people that they're not lizards. So conspiracy theories, what they do is they use all the evidence launched against them as evidence for them. And so because of that, there's a lot of issues, but one of which is they do not have this explanatory virtue, when most theories do. A couple other ones, a lot of theories do, not most. Other two that I want to mention to you are consistency. So we have so consistency comes in internal variety and external. Okay, so the internal variety is an explanation is internally consistent if the explanatory tools do not contradict themselves. So there's nothing in here that contradicts anything else in here. So notice I have 6 explanatory tools here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And none of these contradict each other. So it's not like if the fairy stood a cookie, it's impossible that they're magical. Right? Same thing with maths. There's nothing in maths 1 through 3 that contradicts 1 through 3. Now, some theories do contradict themselves. So some ethical theories, they say something like justice is the most important thing and the only thing that is the only thing that's actually valuable, the only thing that's intrinsically valuable is justice and justice alone. So say if there's a theory that says that at the same time, however, it's willing to sacrifice justice in some sort of periods to promote some sort of greater justice, then it seems internally consistent that say that justice is the ultimate, the only thing that's intrinsically valuable, but at the same time, it's okay to be unjust. So that seems like an internal inconsistency. This theory is internally inconsistent, makes itself false. Other ones that are clear, these aren't theories, but say like the statement, there's no truth, right? Well, that statement is internally inconsistent, or what people call self-referentially inconsistent. And so the statement makes itself false. If someone says there's no such thing as truth, they're expecting you to take that statement as true, right? How am I supposed to take that statement if someone says it to me? Am I supposed to be believing you as that statement being true? And if it is true, then it makes it false. So if there's no truth, then it's either true or false. If that statement's true, then it's false. And if it's false, then it's false. So this is false, right? Same thing about this, like the statement, all sentences are fewer than 5 words long. Well, that statement makes itself false as well, right? It's longer than 5 words long. So you want to make sure your theory doesn't contradict itself in itself. The other type of consistency that we're talking about is external consistency. What external consistency is, do the data points, do the explanatory tools, do these contradict any of the data points? If any of these contradict any of these, then you have an issue with external consistency. You don't want any of your data to contradict, any of your tools to contradict your data. They have to be consistent, not inconsistent. Say, for example, if my explanation had another point that said that they found the cookies behind the door. Well, that would contradict this statement, that this is intended to be all the cookies are gone. We'll do all cookies are gone. So if I had down here that I found it by the door, that would contradict number 1. These are true. These are the data, these are the phenomena that we need to save. We need to save this phenomena or make sense of this phenomena given these tools. So if one of my data contradicts, or one of my tools rather contradicts one of the data points, then my explanation doesn't really get off the ground as an explanation at all. So at the end, in this situation, my explanation and Matt's are both internally and externally consistent. They're both falsifiable. However, Matt's is better, meets other criteria better than mine does. So when you see you have Matt's, you have my theory, and Matt's has more scope. Maths is simpler. Maths has more power A and power B. Maths is plausible. So Matt beats mine in these ones too. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and also Matt's is less ad hoc. Any other ones I believe we equally had. So given this, that Matt beats mine, because the other ones we had were falsifiability, internal and external consistency. So these ones were equal on both. But so Matt's has 1, 2, he has 6 out of 9. And because of that, you can conclude that Matt's explanation is comparatively superior. And so that's the conclusion. Because Matt's explanation has 6 explanatory virtues and Paul's only has 3, maths is comparatively superior to Paul's. All right, well, there'll be some other resources on our site for you, and probably some other videos and other handouts and things that you can see to get a better look at this. If you have questions, please reach out.